Hello to everybody who is continuing to join. We're still seeing a lot of people joining right now, so we'll begin in just a minute or two. Okay, it's a couple minutes after the hour, so we'll get started. Hi, everybody. This is Michele Diecuch. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at ProLiteracy. We're so pleased you were able to join our webinar today. The National Coalition for Literacy is hosting this webinar for everyone. The 2020 Census and Adult Education, Adapting to COVID-19 Challenges. Everyone who signed up for the webinar will receive a recording of it. We'll let folks know about that at the end as well, but we wanted to let you know that you will receive a recording of it. Any questions that are typed in, or any chat or links that are typed in, any resources, that'll be available in a separate document that'll be included with the recording. So don't worry if you're not able to write something down or use a link. We will provide that for you after as well. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom function. That's where we'll be monitoring the questions throughout and answering them as we can. If it's something related to technical difficulties, please use the chat box. Okay, I think we're just about to begin.
Are we ready, Michele?
We're ready. I'm just being, okay, there we go. So this is our agenda. I also want to specifically thank our panelists, our presenters today, Judy Mortrude from World Education, Tabitha Stickel from Goodling Institute, Cynthia Peters from World Education, and Deborah Kennedy, who is our current president of the National Coalition for Literacy. Deborah, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Michele. And as Michele said, in case you didn't hear it, if you have questions as we're doing the presentation, please put them in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also put comments in the chat box, particularly if you're having technical problems. We'll be monitoring that and we'll respond to you on what to do. Don't use raise your hand. I see a question about raise hand. Don't do that. Just put a question in either Q&A or the chat. Thank you. So it's great to be here with you today. This is certainly an important issue as we're dealing with the dual challenges of getting our adult learners to complete the census and managing our way through this coronavirus challenge. Michele, could I have the next slide, please? I'm waiting for the next slide. So we're going to hear first from Judy Mortrude, who is going to talk with us about why the census still counts. It's still important. Today is Census Day, April 1st, 2020. So it's a good day to be doing this. Judy, would you please take it away?
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. Yes, the census count is so important because of its critical role in determining our political representation. At the federal level, the number of seats that a state has in the House of Representatives is based on this population count. And after each decennial census, states will win or lose representatives based on that count. Next slide. It is so important to count everyone on April 1st or during this time period once and in the right place. And let me just reiterate that It means everyone. There is no citizenship status question on the 2020 census. The census needs to count, based on the US Constitution, everyone in the United States on April 1st. Beyond the representation, the federal representation in the House of Representatives, but also the state and local representation decisions that are made using the census data. The census data is also used in the distribution of trillions of dollars every year. Next slide. At George Washington University's Institute of Public Policy, they have been producing some excellent information on the importance of an accurate census count. The Counting for Dollars 2020 project aims to understand the extent to which the federal government will rely on the data from the 2020 census to guide the distribution of those federal funds to state and local areas across the country, and also the impact on the accuracy of the 2020 census on the fair distribution of these funds. Census-guided funding drives a substantial portion of the US economy. On average, 9% of personal income in 2017 was driven by census data, and that varies by state. In states like West Virginia and Mississippi, it's upwards of 16% of personal income is guided by census decisions. While other states like Colorado and Utah have the lowest dependence, roughly around 6%. These state differences in reliance on census-guided spending are really explained by the differences in the percentage of each state's population in poverty and the percentage living in rural areas. So your community's census response doesn't impact the overall size of the pie, but it does determine how big a piece of that pie your community will get. Next slide. So Counting for Dollars did a deep dive into 55 federal programs guided by census data and created fact sheets for all states. We've shared some of those before on these census webinars, and you can find your own state at the website there. They recently produced a comprehensive spreadsheet on all 316 federal programs that are guided by census data, and you see a small snip of that spreadsheet here with adult education, basic grants to states of WIOA Title II, and then many other education programs following. Counting for Dollars then did a super deep dive into 5 programs, including WIOA Title I, which is our adult, youth, and dislocated worker partners in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and in the Every Student Succeeds Act Title I, which is the funding that goes out to schools. And you can see in the second row of this little snip, the Title I grants to local educational agencies, LEAs, was a $15 trillion investment in fiscal year 2017. Next slide. Those Title I grants to LEAs provide financial assistance to schools and school districts with high numbers or high percentages of children from low-income families to help ensure that all children meet state academic standards. So the funds under Title I can be used by schools and school districts to support a wide range of activities, including effective instruction for at-risk children and for enriched and accelerated programs, school-wide programs that serve all children, school-based planning, results-based accountability, promoting parental participation, and coordination with health and social service agencies. It is possible to roughly approximate the average cost to a local educational agency of one poor child missed in the decennial census. Dividing the fiscal year 2017 Title I allocation at $15 trillion by the number of children age 5 to 17 in poverty in 2017, which was shamefully over 9 million, the result is $1,695. That's a nationwide average. The actual number will vary by community, but you can imagine the decade-long impact of missing the neediest families in your community. Next slide. Of course, those 316 federal programs guided by census data include far more than just education programs. Census data guides investments in safety and health, including Medicare, food and nutrition programs, including SNAP, infrastructure, the environment, clean air, water, energy, just seems like just about everything. Well, everything except your COVID-19 individual cash payment. There have been some false claims online that filling out the census will trigger your individual, that $1,200 COVID stimulus payment from the federal government, which is not true. The Census Bureau cannot share any data it collects in the census form with any other agency, making it impossible to tie a payment to your individual response. However, you can be certain that the data that was collected in the Census 2010 about your community and your community's characteristics will definitely guide the kind of stimulus spending a community receives from that $2 trillion federal bill that passed just last week. Next slide. Passing it to you, Tabitha.
And thank you. That's Judy. Before we move to Tabitha, there's one question that's come up in the Q&A. It's a good question. And so I wonder if we could just go back to your slide with the 2017 budgetary impact on it. That's the list of different education programs. There it is. This person didn't quite understand the example you were giving there about the budgetary impact, a multiple $trillion investment in education, she wonders. So could you just clarify that?
That second line there, the Title I grants.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Title I of the Every Student Succeeds Act. So not Title I in our adult ed world. But you know, in elementary schools are called Title I schools or have high Title I populations. It's about this specific investment that the Federal Department of Ed makes out to local education agencies to support those activities that allow every student to hit state academic standards. Those kind of activities like promoting parental involvement and having programs for high-risk kids, also programs for accelerated kids. So Title I is a shorthand way of talking about that federal, that $15 trillion investment in high poverty schools, they're sometimes called.
Judy, I think the question has to do with the fact that it looks like it says 15 billion, not 15 trillion.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. 15.
Are those numbers reported in thousands? That is, are there another 3 zeros at the end of each of those in reality? Or
oh no, it's just me saying it wrong, right?
Okay.
Yes, it's me saying it wrong.
Okay.
Sorry.
So 15 billion, I hope that
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we can move to Tabitha. And Tabitha Stickel from the Goodling Institute is going to talk with us specifically about what has changed with the census under the current circumstances.
Yes, thank you so much. I know that we're all aware of how very much the world has changed in the last few months and continues to change. But just as Judy outlined regarding, the importance of the census, much around the 2020 count has actually remained the same. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there are still 3 ways currently that you can respond to the census. That's online, phone, and paper. Later on in the year, there'll also be enumerators that will still be going around doing interviews for the count. Cynthia will cover that more in depth in the next section, but those are still the 3 mechanisms that you can currently use to respond to the census. The largest change that we're seeing right now in the census is the timeline. Many of the phases of this process have been extended or delayed. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the adjusted schedule as has been put out by the Census Bureau. I do want to emphasize that this is the adjusted schedule as of this week, but things are very much in flux right now. So the best way to stay up to date is to be checking in at the links at the bottom that will take you to the Census Bureau pages themselves. So right now is the self-response phase. Hopefully all of you have received in the mail a code with how to respond to the census online. Those got mailed out mid-March, and they're still, using that method to collect census responses through mid-August at this point. There also is rural enumeration which is happening in very rural areas in northern Maine, in parts of Alaska. And that's where enumerators are actually going and interviewing people while standing outside their home and making sure to maintain that 6-foot distance. This is potentially has been tamped down a little bit from what they intended it to be, but it is still happening in certain rural areas. The mobile questionnaire assistance is where Census Bureau staff go to places like grocery stores and community centers to help people fill out this census online. Again, that will still be happening, but they'll be making sure to keep that social distancing of at least 6 feet. Right now, the plan is for that to launch around April 13th and continue until mid-August. Again, these dates may be fluid, so something to continuously check up on. The early non-response follow-up is when census takers actually do try to contact households that haven't yet responded, and they'll also try and work with college and university students, which are often an undercounted group. That'll be taking place at this point from May 7th to August 14th. The non-response follow-up and re-interview is where what we kind of, I think of with census takers, where they would be visiting households. That is at this time still scheduled to happen. It has been delayed, however, and so is at this point slated to begin at the end of May. And oh, I realize I just left August off, but go until August 14th. Group quarter enumerations, that's where areas like nursing homes and prisons or student housing have census workers come to try and do their counts. Many of these larger institutions, however, are working with staff of the Census Bureau to see if there are ways in which they can gather this information that would require less in-person contact. The service-based enumeration is scheduled to happen at the end of April into May 1st, and that's where census workers go to soup kitchens and shelters and food banks to try and count people that way. The homelessness enumeration is for people who are currently experiencing homelessness, and census workers try to work with local officials to identify areas where individuals experiencing homelessness often stay, like under bridges and in parks or in parking lots of all-night businesses. That has been delayed until May 1st. That will still be happening at this point, but again, they're postponing that until May 1st. And then the last kind of phase of it, of the count, is looking at transitory locations. So census takers go to campgrounds and RV parks and marinas to try and count people there. And that at this point is scheduled to happen April 23rd until May 18th. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so although the different phases of the census have been delayed, the goal still remains the same, that the Census Bureau can deliver their count to the president by December 31st. And then by April of next year, all of those redistricting counts that Judy had gone over earlier, that would be delivered to states by April 1st of 2021. So just the key takeaway regarding COVID-19 and filling out the census is that it is certainly still happening. It is just as important as ever, but it is a changing situation. So you can always check the census links that we've provided in this PowerPoint presentation to make sure you have the most up-to-date information.
Okay, thank you, Tabitha, for that update on all the dates that have changed recently. And as Tabitha said, they are likely to change again in the near future. So you want to keep an eye on that. Our next presenter is Cynthia Peters from World Education, and she's going to really get to the heart of this presentation with ways of adapting to the COVID-19 restrictions that we're all living under. Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thanks everyone for being here, all more than 400 of you who are attending right now. I'm so happy to be able to share these resources with you. My job, I think, is now to sort of think of you all as educators. You've been getting a lot of information about the census. What are some strategies for how to deploy that in the virtual classroom? So I'm going to be talking about three things: more detail about how to fill out the census, some new instructional strategies, especially given the current context, and then a really substantive piece about a specific strategy, which is training people to become census ambassadors. Next slide, please. So first, a little bit of information about the questionnaire. As Tabitha has explained, it's available online, it's on paper, and also you can get help over the phone filling it out. It asks just 9 questions of person number 1. Very straightforward questions like your name, your phone number, your gender, your race, and ethnicity, things like that. For the following person, so say you live in a household with 5 people and you are person number 1, you're the head of household for the purposes of the census, you're person number 1, and then persons 2, 3, 4, and 5 have about 7 questions asked about them. So it's the number of questions is not lengthy, it's not too complicated, it's very doable. The questionnaire bears repeating, does not ask about citizenship, it doesn't ask anything about your immigration status, what country you were born in, anything like that. And you are required by law to fill it out and to fill it out completely. I don't like to kind of use any kind of scare tactic with students when we're talking about the census, but it is a fact that you are required by law to fill it out, just no matter who you are. And not doing so could invite, a phone call later or a visit later. We don't know what the visits are going to look like given the pandemic, but most people would prefer not to have somebody come knocking at their door, so that's a little extra incentive to just go ahead and get this thing done. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk in more detail about these 4 ways. Let's just go to the next slide and let's just drill down right away into So the first one, and the one that I think is perhaps easiest to do in the current moment, is the online questionnaire. And what I have up here on the screen is a screenshot of a practice questionnaire, which we developed at World Education with funding from the National Coalition for Literacy. And this is an excellent tool that you can use with your students. You can share this link, and they have the opportunity to go through something that is basically a replica of the real census questionnaire. And it's a little bit different because it has those, you see the question marks, and there's some type in red. That is information that we added. So if you are on this site and you hover over the question marks, you get a little bit of help. We're thinking about learners filling this out, possibly in a live classroom situation with your help, or possibly on their own time as an assignment from you as a teacher. But this way, they can practice filling it out online. They get the digital literacy skills that are needed. They get the document, sort of the help or the practice looking at a complicated web page that looks maybe slightly overwhelming at first. But if you stick with it, you can make your way through it. And we created this precisely because the census is majority online this time for the first time ever. And now, because of the pandemic, it really is the most practical way to fill it out if you have internet access. So I encourage you to use this practice questionnaire, and this PowerPoint will be emailed to all the participants, so you'll get all these links. So don't worry about trying to quickly copy it all down. You will be getting a copy of this. Okay, next slide, please. What if your students really are going to just fill it out on paper and they're not going to be doing it online? We have another practice tool for you, which is a change agent lesson packet that we developed. And it includes a paper replica of the Census Bureau questionnaire. Again, almost exact replica. We wanted to make it look exactly like what the Census Bureau is going to be handing out. And because we wanted your students to be able to practice in that way. So now a way you can do this online is you can share this PDF with your students, and it's actually a fillable PDF. So they can fill it out online, again, in a live classroom situation or not. They're going to be getting digital literacy practice. as well as, vocabulary practice and just practice filling out a document. You can also print it out. I don't know, some people are mailing packets to their students. I was on a webinar yesterday in Massachusetts where I heard about teachers dropping off packets in mailboxes. People are trying to figure out creative ways to stay in touch with their students. So if you mailed this to students and they had a hard copy, you could talk with them over the phone while they filled it out, and then they would have a copy of their filled out questionnaire, which they could then use when they fill out the real questionnaire. So great practice opportunities, so many skills, so many digital and vocabulary and English and reading and writing skills here. So next slide, please. Okay. Oh, and by the way, that about the paper copy, it's going to be available in English and Spanish only. And I meant to say about the online questionnaire, that will be available in 12 languages besides English. So you could have your students practice in English, but then they might, depending on what language they speak, they might have the opportunity to fill it out in their own language. Okay, what about by phone? Some of you might have been hearing that, you can fill out the census on the phone. I think this is an evolving situation because I called some of these numbers to try to see what it would actually be like to call them. And really what you find out, I called the English and the Spanish because those are the languages I can understand. And what I found was basically they said, we have a shortage of operators because of the coronavirus. If you want the paper copy, please call back later. And really, please just go fill it out online. That was sort of the upshot of the robot voice when you call these numbers. There was more information available. You could press 1 to find out more about who should be counted. You could press 2 to find out, to understand better about race and ethnicity and what those things mean. There was a little bit more help in about 15 languages. So this could be helpful to your students if they want to go through some of that, phone tree stuff with a robot voice. Later, they might have more operators available, or later they might have different messages available, but for now, that's what you get. This might be an interesting research project, honestly, for students to just try calling the number in their language and to see what it says. And they may not use it right now to fill out the census, but they might just get some information. So that might be something to try. What it told me was, honestly, every pathway led back to the online questionnaire in my mind. So whenever possible, I felt like that's really the way to go with our students, if at all possible. So next slide, please. One possibility for getting support for the online questionnaire is there are video tours of the questionnaire in 59 languages. And I think you can see most of them here. This is a screenshot from that webpage. It's a little confusing because when you say you press on Navajo and you get to the Navajo page, what you're going to find is the phone number associated with the Navajo support actually goes to the English language phone number. And the online questionnaire goes to the English language questionnaire. However, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you will get a video tour in Navajo of the online questionnaire. So if your students speak any of these languages, they could get help by watching that video tour of the online questionnaire. However, they will then have to turn around and fill it out in English. So I'm sharing this to say this is basically what's available on the part of the Census Bureau. And so this is what you can sort of share with your students so that they can get all the supports they possibly can to be able to fill this thing out. But if you're treating it as an ESOL lesson, or if you're in your ABE class as a literacy lesson, and if you're teaching about why this matters and you want to get to the part about actually filling it out, possibly just teaching it in English and helping them learn the English vocabulary and filling it out in English could be a really good way to go. Okay, next slide, please. So what are some new teaching strategies during the pandemic? I know there've been a lot of webinars about this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Most of you are familiar that a lot of classes have moved into Zoom or Google Hangouts, so then you're teaching live. You can see a bunch of people on your screen if the video is enabled and people can see each other. It's kind of been very comforting for people to be able to connect that way. Sometimes teachers are assigning things to virtual lessons that students do on their own time. Sometimes Teachers are sending out packets, as I mentioned. And there's also opportunities for project-based learning, and especially given the census happening right now and that being a big moment in our current events and being something that affects our learners so much and affects adult education so much. With the support of the National Coalition for Literacy, we've developed a whole learning strategy for you. And I want to share it now with you. It's about training people to be census ambassadors. Next slide, please. And yes, you can be a census ambassador in a pandemic and even maintaining social distancing. And I'm going to say in more detail how this will be possible later in the slides. But for now, let's just explore what is a census ambassador. So first of all, a census ambassador understands all the census basics. So some of the things that we've talked about here. Why does the census matter? What is it used for? How is your privacy protected? What's on the questionnaire? What do they ask? What do they don't ask? This person has practiced communicating about the census, so they have great speaking and listening opportunity, a chance to use vocabulary over and over again and get comfortable talking to people and listening to their concerns. This census ambassador could support somebody to fill out the census. Now, note, you're not allowed to answer questions for people, but you could sit next to them while they fill it out and help them, struggle through some of the questions. A census ambassador feels comfortable saying, I don't know, because we're not saying that census ambassadors are experts. They're just, they're people who have gotten a little bit, a mastery of some of the elements of what the census is about, and they're able to communicate about it. And they might even communicate passionately about the census and really want to keep the passion that they feel about why it matters. And they might be confronted with questions that they don't know the answer to. And then that could lead to more learning because they could research those questions, bring them back to their classroom, and that kind of thing. One key element is that they can invite people to take a pledge to be counted. This is something on the NCL website, and I'll share those links with you later. And actually, NCL is offering a $20 prize to census ambassadors and an extra $1 per person who takes the pledge. So that's a very sweet little incentive that you can throw in when you're thinking about inviting your students to become census ambassadors. Next slide, please. So at the Change Agent, we made a packet about how you could train somebody to become a census ambassador, and you can find this for free on the Change Agent website. It's a pretty lengthy multi-level packet, and I actually think that since we're time limited at this point, I'm going to go to the next slide and encourage you to use this packet instead. This is packet number 20. And it's a shorter packet, and it's called Help Someone Understand the Census. And the basic idea of it is that you would use this material to help somebody be able to talk to somebody else about the census, be able to communicate to others about the census. And that's what a census ambassador does. And that's why I think this packet might be a slightly better choice at this point. It's available at 3 levels, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So you can pick which one is best for your students. You can mix and match. And there's all the activities are built into this packet. So next slide, please. Another key packet to use is this lesson packet 21, which I already mentioned. This is about how to fill out the questionnaire. A lot of ESOL supports in here for filling out the questionnaire. And next slide. Again, the online replica of the questionnaire. This is going to be another really important teaching tool for getting your census ambassadors ready to talk to others about filling out the questionnaire. Okay, next slide. So here's some of the things that census ambassadors will learn. I want to stress that, this isn't just a civics activity, though obviously it is also a civics activity. You're helping your students develop their leadership. You're getting them out there talking to people virtually, of course, or within 6 feet or outside of a 6 feet distance. But you're also teaching a lot of literacy skills. You're teaching skills that are aligned with the college and career readiness standards. For example, you're adding knowledge about how government works. You're adding vocabulary. You're teaching all these speaking and listening skills. They have to process and retain information. They have to be able to share it back to others. They have to respond flexibly and appropriately to people's concerns. Also, there's this accountability piece. I'll share a document that I have for that, you know, they can track their progress and report their results and reflect on the process and assess themselves and their own success or not as census ambassadors. And they can notice where they could improve, how they could do better. They could share that with you. It's just a wonderful, real life, built-in assessment tool. So I'm trying to emphasize that even if a student doesn't buy into being a census ambassador, you know, and that's their right, of course. We're not, it's even, you know, it's their right to decide if they're going to even fill out the census at all. So one thing I like to stress with people is that when we teach about the census, we are teaching about why it matters, but we're not telling people what to do. And we might come at them very passionately about why this matters to us and why we think it's important in all our communities. And I encourage you to do that, because I think when you care about something, that's contagious for others. But ultimately, it's everybody's decision about whether they're going to fill it out. And certainly it's a student's decision if they want to become a census ambassador. So even if they don't officially become a census ambassador, they could still practice in the classroom and still do all these same activities and get all the same gains, but not sort of officially go out into the world and not collect their $20 gift card that we have as an incentive. So so you don't have to buy into this whole thing officially to still have it as a great practice. Next slide, please. I want to quickly show you some of the things that are in this packet that I recommended. This is the how to talk to somebody else about the census packet. I'm not going to drill down into this too much because we don't have enough time for that, but I want to just say that what's unique about this and what's unique about the change agent in general, and full disclosure, I am the editor of the change agent, so a little bit biased here. We publish articles by students. So these are adult learner voices talking to other adult learners. It has a peer-to-peer quality, which I just find over and over again is incredibly valuable in the classroom. So here is an adult learner saying, "We count us," and she even addresses the reader as my immigrant people, she says. So that has a lot of power when you're sharing articles written by peers and written at a literacy level that is accessible to your students. So next slide. You can see, and the next slide, you can see there are these 3 basic articles that are mostly written by students, not all, but you know, basically cover all the census basics. And I think there's a couple of other articles in these packets, but these are the ones I wanted to share with you for now. So next slide. The articles are also available in audio versions. I have to say that in order to get access to this audio, you do need a $20 subscription to the Change Agent's online materials. It's $20 per teacher per year. You can share your online access with all your students, so it's incredibly inexpensive. And they get access to not just the audio related to the census, but all of our audio. So tons and tons of leveled audio articles and all of our back issues and everything. So if you're interested in that, just look up the Change Agent and you can click on the subscribe button. And using this audio during distance learning is another great teaching strategy, because students can hear the recorded version of the article, read it as they listen, and get tons of practice with pronunciation, reading fluency and comprehension, and even punctuation. I always like to say, when you hear what a period sounds like and what a comma sounds like, because it's being read out loud to you fluently, you learn a lot about how to punctuate. Okay, next slide. So a key part of getting students comfortable being census ambassadors is helping them feel comfortable talking to others about it. I had a little bit of wishful thinking here that maybe we would have time to share some ideas in the chat box. I don't think we have enough time for me to pause to do that, but I would love it if people want to add their ideas while I just go to the next slide and share some ideas. So I'll check the chat and see if people are adding things. But basically, my suggestions for how to help people get comfortable is, honestly, it's practice, practice, practice. Role play in front of people. You can do that virtually in your virtual classroom, or you can give it to them as an assignment to talk to the people that they live with about it. Get feedback, try again, Predict questions and concerns. Now, this is a big one, and it's an important academic skill too. If you're writing a persuasive essay or doing anything like that, you need to think, and you're making an argument for someone about something, you need to think, what are the possible counter arguments going to be, and how can I be prepared for those? So when you're acting as a census ambassador, you also want to predict, what are people going to come back at me with, and how can I respond effectively? Wasn't quite done with that slide. If we could go back, thank you. Yes, some of this we already talked about, being okay saying I don't know. I think that's a really important academic skill. Also job skill, being able to say to somebody who's telling you something, I actually don't understand that, and I have to, could you tell me again, or could you rephrase that? Practice opening the pledge. This is an important part of getting comfortable. You're asking, as a census ambassador, you're going to be asking individuals to take the pledge to be counted. It's a very simple form. They just put their name. And if they say who their census ambassador was, then the person can get compensated with that $1 per person who takes this individual pledge. So to be comfortable as a census ambassador, you want to be able to open up this online form. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. More materials for being a census ambassador, you can find them at this website. San Mateo County in California has done tremendous work training people to be census ambassadors, and they have lots of great materials there. So I'll just share that link with you and move to the next slide. I mentioned about keeping a log. I have the link to this available for people. It's just a Word doc. You could download it and adapt it however you want, but it's something that your students could add to as they go. It's a way to organize information, keep track of their work, reflect on their work, and just use English in a different way. Next slide. Okay, so here's more of our tips. I think we've honestly covered a lot of these. One thing I didn't mention yet, though, is that the census ambassador could also play a role helping people fill out the census questionnaire. Again, they can't do it for them, but they could just sit by them or on the phone with them and support them while they go through it. Next slide. So what about doing this during a pandemic? I'm sure there's many more ideas than these, but this is what I've collected for this slide. One possibility, and this is pretty ambitious, but maybe some of your students would do something like this. I think it would just be an amazing opportunity for leadership and for developing your confidence and your mastery over a set of ideas. And that would be to call your local radio station and find out if you could be interviewed. You could even give them the questions that you want to be asked in advance, which I think is a normal practice anyway, but certainly it would be a helpful practice for students to supply the questions so they know what the answer, they can work on the answers beforehand. There's a lot, in Boston we have Haitian Creole radio stations, Cape Verdean Creole, we have Spanish and English, obviously, radio stations. So there's a lot of options there for small local radio stations. You could get the word out to your community. You could be a virtual guest speaker in another class. So if you're part of a program where you're training people to be census ambassadors, but another class isn't, you could have your student be a guest speaker in another class. You could also be a guest speaker at your virtual worship service. I know many churches, synagogues, mosques are figuring out how to shift all of their worship services to Zoom or to some sort of online platform. You could ask your minister or your religious leader, could I have 5 minutes to say something about the census and about why it matters in our community? And that would be wonderful learning opportunity and speaking opportunity. If you're trying to work with, people are doing all kinds of interesting things, in getting together, even in cars. Teachers are driving to visit their students in their car, driving through the communities just to say hello to their students by car, never getting out of their car. You could meet your students in their cars somewhere, especially if there's a business that has extended their Wi-Fi, and I understand that this is happening in places. So you don't have to get out of your car to borrow a business's Wi-Fi, and your class could show up there in their cars and fill out the census or do the practice questionnaire in their cars using a borrowed Wi-Fi. Other suggestions include, other virtual gatherings, and obviously using WhatsApp, Google Hangouts, Facebook pages, whatever tools you feel comfortable with to communicate with others about something that matters. Okay, next slide. So if you would like to take this on and become a trainer of census ambassadors, NCL actually has a gift for you as well. You would earn a $50 gift card if you took the pledge to be a trainer of census ambassadors, and if you join our community of practice, which we have set up through World Education, and you would get $1 for every ambassador that you train. So these are small kind of token gifts, but we love the idea of just being able to incentivize this project. So I hope people will consider. And if we go to the next slide, I think we have, oh yeah, this is a page showing what it looks like when you're an individual pledging to be counted. You really just have to put your name. But if you also list the name of the census ambassador that you talked with, then your census ambassador will get credit and will get that $1. If you're pledging as a teacher and you want to get the $50, or if you're pledging as a census ambassador and you're going to get the $20, you have to put your full address, obviously, so the gift card can be mailed to you. Next slide. Here are the links for those 3 ways to take the pledge. The first link is if you are a teacher or staff person and you're training others to be a census ambassador. That's your link right there. Make sure you put your address. If you're a census ambassador and you're pledging to be a census ambassador, you put that link. Make sure you name the person who trained you so they can get credit. And if you're an individual taking the pledge, then it's that 3rd link. I hope all this makes sense. I know it's a lot of information very quickly. There's some more resources here, and I think this is my last slide. And just as a reminder, if these links went by really fast, don't worry about it. You'll be getting a copy of a PDF of this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to access all the links. Thank you all so much, everybody.
Thank you, Cynthia. That's really an amazing amount of material in a short period of time. And I would like to personally say thank you to Cynthia and to her colleagues at World Education for putting together all of that material, which is really superb. It's wonderful to be able to work with them to provide this for the field. This is Deborah Kennedy. I'm the president of the National Coalition for Literacy, and I'm going to talk very briefly here about some approaches to outreach that you can use, some of which Cynthia has already referred to. Next slide, please, Michele. So the core message, and this is really important, more important now in the coronavirus context, is that the census is an opportunity to shape your community's future by making sure that the government knows, the Census Bureau knows, how many people are in your community and how many of them are of what age, so that federal resources can be allocated effectively, as Judy said earlier in the presentation, and so that representation in the Congress and representation in the Electoral College, voting for the president, is allocated appropriately. An example that you can use in that core message is emergency response. Census data is used by first responders and other disaster recovery people, FEMA and others, to identify how much help is needed, what the level of need is when some kind of a disaster happens. And since we're all in the middle of a fairly major disaster right now, that is one way to illustrate the importance of responding to the census. Responding to the census is a way to make your voice heard. Whether you're an adult educator, an adult learner, a member of the community, whoever you are, it is a way to participate in our democracy and make your voice heard. In the context of the coronavirus and the limitations that most of us are under working from our homes, this has become really crucial in the last couple of weeks. When Tabitha was going over the changes that have happened with the census plan and the census calendar, one of the things that she didn't have a chance to mention is what the Census Bureau calls update leave. That is the process where they go out in rural communities and places where people have post office boxes rather than home addresses. And they leave the physical print census form for people to fill out. That happens a lot in the areas, rural areas that Tabitha referenced. It also happens on Native American reservations and a lot of other places. And it isn't happening because of the coronavirus restrictions. As a result, the current rate of response on the Native American reservations is very low. It's only about 2.5 or 3%, where the rate of response, self-response countrywide is about 37 or 38% now. So this is a real issue, and it's making the role of adult educators and census ambassadors much more important, because that personal outreach, that face-to-face contact is so important with some communities in terms of getting folks to respond to the census invitation. So you, as an adult educator, are very important in this context. Could I have the next slide, please? Oh, I do want to address a question that came up in the chat box. Marisa raised a question about talking with someone on the phone and filling out the form for them on your computer while talking with them on the phone. My first response to that was to say, no, that probably isn't allowable, but I'm thinking that the Bureau may change or adjust its policy on that, and I don't know for sure. So I'm going to ask, and I will get a response out to all of you who are listening today about whether the Bureau will accept having a census ambassador or an adult educator call up another person and fill out the form on their behalf on the computer. I will let you know what the answer is that I get. So I wanted to talk about outreach with adult learners first. This segues from what Cynthia was just talking about. Use texting where your folks have smartphones. You can text them to remind them and encourage them to respond online or on the phone or on paper for that matter, but just to encourage them, let them know you're thinking about them, and encourage them to respond. You can also distribute the print materials and the census-related lesson packets that Cynthia was talking about, and teacher parades. This is happening in my area, and I think in a number of other areas around the country in K-12 education, particularly for elementary schools, where students are stuck at home, being homeschooled at this point. The teachers are getting in their cars and making a little parade through neighborhoods to just wave to their kids and let them know that they're thinking about them, that they're still in touch and still concerned for them. So the kids actually get to see their teachers. And I think this is something that could conceivably work in a slightly modified format with adult learners as well, just so that they see you and know that you are thinking about them, you haven't forgotten them, even if they don't have online access and you can't reach them that way. This is a way to just kind of drive by and wave and say hello. The thing to focus on is to be in touch with them as frequently as you can and to keep your message fairly simple. Have you completed the census yet? Remember, it's really important. Just a simple message. Remember, this is how you can make your voice heard. Next slide, please. Another thing you can do is communicate with your community. And Cynthia was talking about asking to do a radio interview. It's really not hard to do that, and radio stations are very interested in this. I did a series of radio interviews last week myself. To find a radio station, here's how you do that. Go to this website and put in your zip code or your address, and they will give you a list of the local radio stations. And the Census Bureau has a whole set of media resources that you can use. Little PSAs so that you can make a short announcement if the radio station just gives you an opportunity to make a short 1 or 2 minute PSA, or other materials that you can use, scripts and other materials if you're doing a longer interview about the census. But hearing your voice on the radio as a person who's connected to the adult education community can be extremely effective in motivating people to respond to the census. And another thing you can do is distribute flyers and posters. The Census Bureau has produced some really nice ones that you can download from the website that's referred to there, and put them up or distribute them in some way so that people are encouraged to respond to the census. And our next slide. The last thing you can do is communicate with local businesses. A lot of this is going on. I think some of you are probably doing this already. Ask them to include census flyers with to-go meals, if they're a restaurant, or in grocery bags. Any place that people are going to pick up food or pick up supplies, ask the business to put census flyers in the bags to encourage people to complete it. And this illustration here is one that the Census Bureau has. They have a whole little set of these actually that you can download and print, or you can use as PDFs on social media if you are doing that. And another thing that you can do, as Cynthia was referring to, you can ask businesses to extend their Wi-Fi. Businesses are ramping up their Wi-Fi, extending it outside their buildings, and removing the password protection so that people can use the Wi-Fi to respond to the census online. And people can sort of drive up in their car and park and complete the census online using the business's Wi-Fi. So you can ask local businesses if they're willing to do that, encourage them to do that. And I think we're getting to the end of the line here. The last thing to do is to stay up to date on your area. This little map is provided by the folks at NYU. They are tracking, along with the Census Bureau, the real-time completion rates. And actually looking at the self-response map right now, the current response rate is 36.2%. You can go to this map. It lets you drill down and see what's happening in your area, see where your hard to count populations are. You can see in this version, this is from yesterday, and you can see that Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan were ahead of the rest of the country in terms of their completion level. I'm happy to report that Indiana and Utah and Kansas and Virginia have added to that themselves to that list. They're ahead at this point in responding. And you can see that some of our states not so far ahead in responding. But you can drill down on this map and see what's happening right in your area and know where outreach really needs to happen. I hope that this information has been helpful to you. I think we have one more slide, Michele. Yes, our thank you slide. Thank you for being with us today. In particular, thanks to all of our presenters for what they have presented. As we said at the beginning, we will be sending out the links to this PowerPoint, to the questions and answers that came up in the chat box, and a recording of this as well. So you'll be receiving links to all of those. Please do become a Census Ambassador trainer if you're interested in doing that. We need all the Census Ambassadors we can get. And I promise, have an answer for you on the question of filling out over the phone for someone else. I'll have that as soon as I can get the attention of the folks at the Census Bureau. So thank you all for joining us today. If we have any more questions that you'd like to put in the chat box right now, please feel free to do that. I don't see, I have one in the Q&A. Yes, there's a combination, there's a question about paper copies not being sent out yet. That's correct. What has been sent out so far is the first invitation, which has your census number and the invitation to respond online. And then a second invitation has come out. The paper copies, I think the target for mailing them out is the next couple of weeks. So they should be coming out soon. And there isn't Beth Moyer has asked if there will be a certificate for this, and we don't have certificates. We can talk about that for the Census Ambassador training, Cynthia, but we don't have certificates for this particular presentation. No. Thank you all for joining us, and go fill out your census form and go train your students to be Census Ambassadors. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.